And we welcome you back to Hour 2 of America's Forum. I'm J.D. Hayworth.
And I'm John Bachman. Joining us now to discuss the president's trip over to the Middle East is Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter Judy Miller.
Hi.
How you doing, Judy? Good to talk to you.
Good to talk to you this morning.
All right, so the president's now back in Washington after his trip to Saudi Arabia. And Judy, earlier this week, or last week I should say, we had Alan Dershowitz on the show. We were asking him about this issue with the Jerusalem Post reporter who was not allowed to go on this trip, an American, part of the presidential press pool. Dershowitz said that the president should have canceled his trip. Do you agree with that assessment?
No, I think that would have been an overreaction. I think there are different ways to manifest our displeasure with that. And I think the action itself did more harm to the Saudis than it did to either the reporter who was covered by his colleagues or to the Obama administration. I mean, look, this is a very crass and crude and stupid thing to do. And it speaks for itself. But there was so much important business to be done between Riyadh and Washington, and this trip was so long overdue that these two men had to sit down to have this conversation.
Well, Judy, let's talk some about the important business that needed to be reviewed. As you take a look at it, Judy, what transpired? What do you think comes out of this pseudo summit in Saudi Arabia?
Well, I don't think anything comes out except it's always good to sit down and talk to people who are your ostensible allies on various fronts and against various foes. But both sides were able to kind of issue a statement that said that while they had tactical disagreements, there was strategic accord on how the world looks to us both. And I think that's actually not right. I think the problems remain rather severe, and I think that the Saudis just have a very different way of looking at the world from President Obama.
And Judy, what do you think about, and what do you make of these reports about the Saudis being upset about whatever relationship has developed between Iran and the United States as a result of these discussions?
Well, this is exactly the point. I mean, you know, President Obama wants to engage the Iranians and try and retard their nuclear program through engagement and a series of incentives after sanctions have really taken a toll. And that is certainly worth trying. And as you know, I have been a supporter of this 6 months of negotiations to try and stop the program, because we have got out of that already that we had never been able to get before from them. But to the Saudis, Iran is their eternal rival, if not outright enemy. And any form of engagement with them by the United States is a loss for the Saudis. They really see this as a zero-sum game, and that's not the way the United States views it. Obviously, there's just two different ways of looking at the world here.
Judy, a different kind of engagement within the boundaries of Saudi Arabia. Of course, President Obama, following, I guess, protocol and diplomatic inclination, did not bring up human rights, did not bring up women's rights to the Saudi king, yet before the president left Saudi Arabia, he publicly gave an award to a Saudi woman who has worked to prevent domestic violence. The Mr. Outside and Mr. Inside, is that diplomatic duplicity par for the course? Was that a wise course of action to follow, to have one public ceremony talking about domestic violence, but then not to bring it up with the king during the talks in Riyadh or elsewhere?
Well, first of all, we don't really know what was brought up between these two men. We really don't. We know what each side said was discussed, but I think we shouldn't be naive about what goes on in these meetings. But right now, let's look at the issues in front of us. There is the nuclear agreement with Iran, or the lack of such an agreement. There's the slaughter in Syria that's ongoing. There's what to do about Russia and the Ukraine. There's Syrian chemical weapons. There's the mess in Egypt. There are so many more pressing strategic issues for the United States and for the Saudis to deal with that if they didn't get to human rights on this trip, I would not be surprised, nor would I be offended. And I think that the president's gesture by giving that award to the Saudi woman spoke volumes, and it said everything that needed to be said. So I don't fault him for handling this trip in the way in which he has. What I fault him for is taking so long to get this trip on his very crowded agenda. I mean, this is a really important issue. The Saudis are the single most important country financially in the Middle East. They are our long-standing ally, and they are very unhappy with the United States and its policy under President Obama. So these conversations had to be held.
Now, Judy, can you recall a time when a U.S. president has kind of ruffled the feathers or upset maybe both the Saudis and the Israelis the way President Obama has managed to do?
Well, to tell you the truth, I really can't. It's rather an extraordinary achievement to raise the most profound questions in the minds of both of your allies on both sides of a conflict that you've been trying to solve. I mean, the Saudis have been really good citizens here in terms of trying to put forth a plan. They did that many years ago that would help bridge the gap between Israelis and Palestinians. They feel strongly that conflict has to be settled, not just on its own merits, but because it detracts attention from what they consider the real issue, which is this fight with the Iranians, the Shia, the Persians. That to them, this is an existential issue for Saudi Arabia, and they don't want to be, quote, distracted by things like the Palestinian issue. So, in diplomacy, it always helps to be able to put yourself in the other person's shoes. And I think that's what we've got to do here. You also have to remember that we're watching in Saudi Arabia, just as the president was visiting, this huge succession development, because once again, a Saudi kingdom before this one once imploded because they could not agree on succession. Now we've had the first kind of designated crown prince, deputy premier minister. This is a huge deal for the Saudis. And so they were both taking care of internal business while President Obama was there and dealing with President Obama. But this is an amazing moment. I think that the president must understand how profound the questions are about his leadership are, both in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and in Riyadh, because both leaders, both men, Bibi Netanyahu and the King of Saudi Arabia, have real doubts about America's ability and willingness to defend its friends, and that's not a place that we want to be.
Judy, the litany, at least post 9/11, has been about the Saudis and their financial support of those who would be involved in the Wahhabist movement and at least support once removed or private support perhaps for groups like Al-Qaeda. As you assess the situation with Al-Qaeda and all of these extra-national groups, I guess we call them, dealing with asymmetrical warfare and terrorism, do you think we are seeing Al-Qaeda and groups like it fighting amongst themselves in the Middle East now? Or what is the status of Al-Qaeda in the here and now?
Well, that's the good news, if you could talk about good news among militant Islamic groups. In Syria, the militant Islamists are fighting among themselves and have killed many of each other. And that's really a positive development for the moderates and the secular forces in the Middle East. I don't think you could count on that. I don't think you can depend on it continuing. I think it reflects the situation in Syria. Elsewhere, you see a lot of cooperation. You also see some very unsettling cooperation between the Shiite Hezbollah in Lebanon and some of the most extreme militant Sunnis.
Yeah, Judy, Syria is a topic for a whole other day, but thanks for your insight. We'll get to that later on. We want to thank you for your time here, but a great discussion there on the intricacies and importance of the relationship with the Saudi royal family.
And obviously, we want to hear from you, your take on the president's visit to Saudi Arabia. Here's the way you get in touch with us: via Twitter @NewsmaxTV, #AmericasForum, email connect@newsmaxtv.com, or facebook.com/Newsmax.
Tonight we are a country